Have you ever had that strange feeling that things are not quite as they seem, as if an invisible force were behind everything, pulling the strings, blowing ideas, shaping reality itself around you? Well, you are not delusional. Ancient forgotten manuscripts, dusty texts that have survived fire and censorship, speak of hidden entities that inhabit the darkest folds of our world. They do not present themselves in public squares. They do not advertise themselves on billboards. On the contrary, they prefer the backstage, the dark corners of the human psyche. They are masters of deception, architects of illusion. Their names? Few dared to pronounce them, but the Gnostics called them Archons, guardians of an imperfect cosmos, children of a blind creator who have entangled humanity in their web of illusions since time immemorial. Imagine a gigantic theater with glittering curtains and hypnotized actors. Now imagine that behind these curtains there are invisible beings, whispering scripts, manipulating every scene, every gesture, every belief. Shh! Have you heard the whisper? But after all, where did these entities come from? Who dared to free them from the primordial darkness? And why does their influence still hang over us like a thick, suffocating cloak? To understand this, we need to go back to the beginning of everything, to the moment when an immeasurable desire opened an abyss in the fabric of the cosmos. The first echo, Sophia and the original error. In the beginning, there was no darkness nor light. There was only the One, an indescribable plenitude where everything was absolute harmony. But like a melody that yearns to echo, a desire sprouted in the bosom of eternity. Sophia, the personification of wisdom, yearned to create. She wanted to generate life from herself, without the consent of the source. A pure yearning, perhaps, but also reckless, and so it was that she committed the so-called original error. Alone, she shaped an imperfect emanation, a being blind to the true light, the Demiurge. Imagine a sculptor carving a statue, but in the dark, with trembling hands. The result was a flawed creator who, unaware of his limitation, dared to architect an entire cosmos. His world was beautiful, yes, full of sparkling stars and spiraling galaxies. But behind that brilliance, there were cracks, and from those cracks, like larvae emerging from the trunk of a sick tree, emerged the Archons. They were extensions of the Demiurge's ignorance, cogs in a misaligned cosmic clock. And with their invisible tentacles, they began to intertwine matter and spirit, creating the prison we know as reality. But did these beings act out of pure evil? Or did they simply follow a distorted logic, repeating patterns inscribed in their essence since the first breath of the universe? To understand this, we need to look more closely. After all, how were these Archons really born? What forces shaped them? And what are the archetypes that they incarnate to this day? The birth of the Archons. When the Demiurge, blind and arrogant, proclaimed, "I am the only God," his cry echoed through the void like thunder without a troubadour. But it was not creation that responded. It was the distortions that were born from the cry itself. The Archons emerged in this way, not by choice, but as reflections of an imperfect act. Each one carried a fragment of the original imbalance, like shadows cast by a poorly calibrated light. Imagine drops of black ink dissolving in a crystal-clear lake. Each drop forms whirlpools, currents, and areas of turbidity. The Archons are these currents, invisible, but capable of dragging any careless soul into the depths. Described in ancient Gnostic codices with almost poetic and at the same time terrifying language, they are living representations of the vices and limitations that enslave the human psyche. Ignorance, the veil that prevents the vision of truth. Pride, the illusion of separation and superiority. Fear, the chain that binds hearts. Blind desire, the fire that consumes and devours without ceasing. But don't be fooled by their abstract appearance. Although they are emanations of a cosmic error, Their actions are diabolically concrete. They intertwine themselves in the fibers of the material world and in the labyrinths of the human mind. Each one becomes, little by little, a hidden architect of our choices, thoughts, and impulses. Like invisible parasites, they penetrate social systems, collective beliefs, and even our most intimate existential dilemmas. But after all, how exactly do these imperceptible beings exert so much power? What is their method, their modus operandi? How do they manage to weave a prison without bars and make most people never even notice the walls? Get ready. In the next step of the journey, you will enter the backstage of this silent theater, how the Archons control the world. Don't expect to find the Archons in dark caves or in ancient rituals. They don't need to show themselves. They don't even need to touch you. Their true strength lies in something much more subtle and infinitely more effective. They manipulate perception. Like masters of a game of mirrors, they distort the way we see reality. What you believe to be desire may be a trap. What you fear may be an invisible string pulled by hands you have never seen. The Archons do not create the physical world. The Demiurge has already done that. They shape the minds that inhabit it. They use fear as a chain. They feed the ego like poison. They spread chaos so that you never find peace. Imagine a puppet that believes it is free while its strings dance to perfection. With every alarmist headline, every belief implanted, every empty idol erected, there they are, laughing in silence. And the more the world becomes a maze of distractions, the stronger their grip becomes. For those who run from one corner to the other, seeking fleeting pleasures or fleeing from manufactured fears, do not look within. They do not realize that the real enemy is not outside, but inside their own mind. But there is a catch. Not even the Archons are invincible. There is a force they fear deeply, a light that blinds and undoes them. Want to know what it is? Get ready. In the next step, we will explore the spark they cannot extinguish, and that you may have forgotten you carry. The light, the Archons fear. Shh! There is a secret that the Archons do everything they can to hide. Something so powerful that if you remember it, they simply lose all control over you. This light does not come from outside. It does not spring from the sun or the stars. It pulses silently, right in the center of your being. The Gnostics called it the divine spark. A fragment of the true primordial light, prior to Sophia's era, prior even to the imperfect creation of the Demiurge. For the Archons, this spark is a cruel mirror. When it shines, it reveals their illusions, dismantles their tricks, dispels their shadows. That's why they work tirelessly to keep you distracted. Watch out. The flood of superficial content, the exaltation of empty materialism, the glorification of the ego, of ephemeral pleasure, of unbridled competition. Each of these traps is a veil cast over the spark. The more you identify with what is outside, the less you perceive what is pulsing within. But if in a moment of silence, of true introspection, you touch this light, everything changes. The game changes. Control is undone. And this is what the Archons fear most: awakened souls. For one awakened soul infects others, and one day their empire may simply collapse like a house of cards. But is it possible to recognize these beings in action? Do they have faces, shapes, names, or do they remain eternally hidden in the fabric of reality? In the next step, you will begin to see what few have dared to look at: the hidden faces of the Archons. The hidden faces of the Archons. Have you ever dreamed of eyes watching you in the darkness? Or have you felt that subtle, almost imperceptible presence that seems to lurk just beyond your field of vision? Well, you should know, it's not always just imagination. The ancient Gnostics described the Archons with symbols and images that would send shivers down the spines of even the most skeptical mind. Not because they wanted to scare people, but because ordinary words were not enough to capture what they were. In some manuscripts, they appear as winged serpents, slithering between planes with fiery eyes. In others, as cold, metallic forms, living gears of the false cosmos of the Demiurge. There are even those who report visions of reptilian entities with shiny scales and eyes that pierce the soul. Metaphors? Who knows? But like all metaphors, they hide a truth. The Archons do not have bodies like ours. They dress themselves in symbols, taking on forms that correspond to the weaknesses, fears, and projections of the human mind. Each person sees what most entangles them. For some, they appear as oppressive authority figures. For others, as irresistible temptations. And there are those who see them only as voices, whispering, insidious, that corrode inner clarity. Their greatest trick, to make us believe that their suggestions are our own thoughts. Now imagine the impact of this on human history. How many decisions, wars, entire systems have been shaped under their invisible influence? How many times have the Archons been behind major events, manipulating puppets that they didn't even know were strings in their hands? In the next step, we'll go even deeper. We'll explore how the Archons have shaped the history of humanity, generation after generation. The Archons in human history. Close your eyes for a moment. Now imagine an invisible thread running through millennia, weaving wars, building empires, shaping religions, distorting ideas. For this is exactly how the Archons operated, and still operate. Since the earliest civilizations, these shadow beings have infiltrated the structures of power, not with swords or armies, but with something much more effective, the control of minds and narratives. Wars fought in the name of distorted gods. Caste systems that perpetuated suffering under the guise of divine order. Dogmas that stifled the inner spark instead of liberating it. Each of these moments bears the signature of the Archons, a subtle trace of spiritual manipulation. Remember, their food is fear, chaos, ignorance. The greater the spiritual misery of the masses, the more power they accumulate. It is no coincidence that humanity's greatest tragedies are linked to false ideas accepted as absolute truths. Think of the Crusades, the Inquisitions, the totalitarian regimes that made the cult of personality a new altar. In all of them, the same pattern, the replacement of inner freedom with golden and invisible chains. But not everyone allowed themselves to be entangled. Throughout history, a few dared to confront these beings. Guided by the inner light, they opened paths to liberation, even at a very high price. Who were these daring ones? How did they face such ancient and subtle forces? In the next step of the journey, you will meet the masters who confronted the Archons and the lessons they left for us. Masters who confronted the Archons. Amidst the vastness of the ages, while multitudes marched under the invisible baton of the Archons, some souls awakened. Like small flames in pitch-black nights, they dared to see beyond the curtains of illusion. They were not warriors with steel swords. They were masters of consciousness. For they knew that the Archons do not fear muscles or armies. They fear that which they cannot touch, the freed spirit. Jesus the Nazarene proclaiming that the kingdom is not of this world. The early Gnostics unveiling the cosmic game in their secret gospels. Sufi mystics dancing in ecstasy to break the barriers of the mind. Medieval alchemists seeking the philosopher's stone, not in gold, but in the transmutation of the soul. Each, in their own way, faced the same enemy, the Archon's web that envelops thoughts, feelings, entire societies, and they paid the price, persecuted, silenced, distorted. For a free spirit threatens the entire illusory edifice that sustains the dominion of the Archons. But even under fire and sword, their words echoed. Their teachings have crossed the centuries, like seeds waiting for fertile soil. Now, these seeds are beginning to sprout again. More and more souls are beginning to glimpse the hidden gears. But to follow this path, it is not enough to want to. You need to practice. So how can you free yourself from the invisible threads? What ancient practices can still help us today to break through the illusion and rekindle the inner spark? In the next step, you will begin to learn some of the most powerful Gnostic techniques of liberation. Gnostic techniques of liberation. Now that you know, there are threads pulling your thoughts, emotions, desires. But what if you could cut these threads? What if you could see, for the first time, the entire stage with its actors and its invisible directors? The Gnostic masters did not just leave warnings, they left tools, practices that do not require temples or priests, but a much more powerful ally, your awakened consciousness, deep meditation, not to escape the world, but to silence the noise that the Archons sow in the mind. Constant self-questioning. Every belief, every fear, every desire must be examined. Where does it come from? Who does it serve? Hidden knowledge, gnosis, not empty information, but living knowledge that connects you to the true source. The Archons thrive on automatism. Every time you react without thinking, believe without questioning, act on autopilot. An invisible smile appears in some fold of reality. That is why Gnostic practice is a path of radical presence, being awake. Seeing the gears, no longer being a puppet, but be careful. When you start to wake up, they notice. Like restless shadows, they intensify their game. They create new distractions, new fears, new temptations. That is why it is essential to also know their most sophisticated weapons. It is not enough to know that they exist. You need to understand how they act in detail. And that's exactly what we're going to explore next. The Archon's secret weapons, the ones that even the most observant of us might miss. The Archon's secret weapons. Shh! Listen, the Archons don't always approach with a roar. More often than not, they come with a seductive whisper. They have learned over the millennia that brute force is only so much. True power lies in mastering the mind, in shaping desires, in subtly numbing the spirit. Inflated ego. You are superior. You deserve more than others. Divisive speeches. They are different. They are enemies. Partial truths. You already know everything. You don't need to search any further. Immediate pleasures. Why seek the truth if the next click gives you momentary relief? Each of these weapons is a poison disguised as nectar. They lodge in our thoughts like parasites, reproducing with every distraction, with every unconscious impulse. And the more we identify with the body and the material world, the more we forget the spark that burns silently within us. Imagine a puppet that believes it has cut its strings, but now dances happily to the tune imposed on it. This is how the Archons keep many, apparently, awakened seekers still entangled. But why so much effort? Why, after all, do such ancient and powerful beings dedicate so much energy to preventing our awakening? The answer lies in their own fear. For there is something they fear more than any sword, any spell, any exorcism. Want to know what it is? Get ready. In the next step, you will discover the Archon's greatest fear, the one that can put an end to their rule. The Archon's greatest fear. Now, come closer. Imagine a creature of the shadows that reigns supreme in a windowless room. For ages, it controls everything. Everyone fears it. Everyone obeys it. But one day, a crack appears in the wall. A ray of light crosses the room. And suddenly, that which was untouchable trembles. That's how it is with the Archons. They fear neither swords nor armies. They fear neither science nor technology. Their greatest fear is spiritual awakening, because an awakened human being can no longer be manipulated. They do not bow to false beliefs. They do not allow themselves to be dominated by planted desires. They do not seek outside what is already burning within. When the divine spark is fully ignited, the Archon's game simply stops working. Their weapons become useless, their traps laughable. That is why they invest so much in constant distraction. That is why they create a world where everything drags us out of ourselves and away from the inner light. They know an awakened humanity is their end. Every soul that awakens is a breach in their empire, and every breach a harbinger of collapse. But is their dominion restricted only to the spiritual plane, or do their tentacles also extend through the visible gears of the modern world? Get ready. In the next step, we will explore the possible presence of the Archons in the contemporary world, a territory where many prefer not to look, but that you need to know. Archons in the contemporary world open your eyes wide, but not just your physical ones. For if there is a stage where the Archons dance today, it is in the spectacle of modern life. No, you will not see them wearing ancient robes or whispering in dark caves. Today, they hide behind bright screens, invisible algorithms, and carefully woven narratives, in the systems of power that crush individual freedom, in the media that feeds fear and division with every new headline, in the markets that sell bottled happiness and off-the-shelf spirituality, in the networks that addict, alienate, and silently extinguish the glow of the inner spark. It's the old game, with new masks. The stage has been modernized, but the script remains the same, to keep you distracted, fragmented, submissive. And what's more, the more the world accelerates, the more opportunities arise for its claws to deepen. We live surrounded by a symphony of noise, designed to pull us away from the silence where truth dwells. But what if we started to listen beyond the cacophony? What if, even in the midst of the modern whirlwind, we could recognize the patterns and break their invisible chains? Some say that a new movement of awakening is already underway. People in every corner of the world are beginning to see, to question, to remember. But this is just the beginning. Behind the scenes of our time, even more subtle and complex forces are moving, and the real game may be much bigger than we imagine. What if all that we've seen so far was just the first layer? What lies even deeper, beyond the Archons? Who, or what, really pulls the strings behind the grand theatre of reality? That is a story for another chapter. Follow the channel, and don't miss the next episodes exploring the spiritual world together.